Do you have a clear path on how to become more profitable in your travel business? I'm Brianna, the owner of Milk and Honey Travels, and this is a podcast for us by us where we have deep conversations with honest answers. Nothing is off limits here. Thank you for being here. Let's dive in. So today I'm super excited to chat with Stephanie Cannon of SC Travel Design, which is your travel agency, but you're also the creator of Book to Bank and Financially Fit Bootcamp, two programs she's designed for travel advisors to help them attain higher profits without hours of number crunching or the need for a finance or accounting degree to do it, which is really, really helpful. But you yourself are a licensed CPA and small business accountant. And so I think you're acutely aware of all the many intricacies when it comes to numbers and data and how knowing this information can transform our businesses from the inside out. So I'm super excited to have you here and have this conversation. Thank you and welcome to the podcast.
Yes, thank you for having me. This is one of the exciting things I like to do.
Yeah, I mean, I'm excited to have you because selfishly, I am thrilled that it's me that gets to interview you today. I think Whitney, the two of us who run Masters in Travel, she's more of the numbers person. I think her dad's actually a CPA. So she's the one who's like doing the spreadsheets and making the formulas. And I'm always like, I got enough money in my bank account. Yay. So I feel like that's a lot of our listeners are probably going to be able to relate to that idea that like it's maybe not the area that we're strong in, but we know that it can help us, but we're not sure we're not even sure what we don't know, right? And so that's kind of where you come in and you just offer a lot, I think, to the conversation. So let's just start kind of like, you have this two sides of what you're doing now. And I kind of like to think of it, what I think happened for you, which happened for a lot of us, is there was a little bit of a pandemic pivot for you. So how did we get here? What started it? And like, give us a little bit of the backstory.
Yeah, and you're exactly correct. The pandemic, right? It changed a lot of things for a lot of different people. And, my whole background is in accounting. Like that's what my degree's in. I worked in that industry for many years. Always been a numbers person.
Yeah.
And I realized that most people aren't.
Yeah.
So it's just one of those things, having been now in the travel industry I'm coming up on 18 years. So it's really, I know, it's
That's
been
amazing.
a while.
Yeah.
And I probably started like very similar to a lot of people coming into the industry, burnout from, my accounting, the corporate job, and just wanted nothing to do with the money side of it anymore. And then you jump in feet first, you learn all the things, and you're like, oh, wait a minute, I need to make a profit in this business, which means I need to look at my money and track my numbers and all of that fun stuff. And the pandemic to me was the perfect opportunity to turn around and help those in our industry because I had been in it so long already. Like I understood how the industry worked, the differences between, maybe somebody who's just starting out to somebody who has built their agency, but they're still kind of a company of one. And then also moving on to those who are starting to build teams, like they have ICs underneath of them, or maybe they have a larger agency and it's really the same concepts get applied across all of those. It's just, what do they look like based on the stage where they are? Yeah. So it was kind of an easy transition for me. And I think the challenging piece is just learning how to talk about it in a way that's not all, the lingo from the accounting and finance world, translating that to real life travel industry examples that people can wrap their brains around. Because I feel like so many people need help in this area, and not because they don't want to learn it, but they probably just don't know where to start.
Yeah, I love that. So I think that it's really, really interesting that you said that there's every stage of business kind of probably has its own unique kind of like struggles that you're probably dealing with when you get to this stage versus this stage versus this stage. But across the board, there's still kind of like this underlying theme of like, no, you need to have a plan. You need to know your numbers. You need to, in order to really see success from this level to the next, you're going to have to do something probably different than what you're doing now. Was there something that kind of like, was it just kind of in talking to other advisors or hearing kind of grumblings in Facebook groups or your host agency or something like that, that kind of got you realizing that like, hey, what comes naturally to me and kind of what I see through like my unique background and unique filter is not what other people are really good at. Was that something that like you just kind of like heard? Were people telling you this?
Yeah. So, going to the different conferences, conventions, money part comes up, right?
Yeah.
Like, okay, so how do we create our money goals and how do we look at not our actual profit and loss statement, but maybe a projected one so that
Mm.
we can see how to set money goals based on like what we're trying to do with our business and where we want to grow. And so many people, and I'm not going to lie, early on, I was the same way running, like I said,
Mhm.
running from that corporate job. I wanted nothing to do with it. Like, let's go have fun planning
Right,
travel for people.
right.
And then it's like, oh, wait, this is a real business that needs a profit motive, right? So I can replace my income, my
Yeah,
salary
yeah,
that I left behind. But so many people just don't understand numbers. Like
yeah.
it all comes, I don't know, I'm bad at math. I hate
Mhm.
numbers, like all of the stuff. But you don't have to be good at math anymore because we have spreadsheets and we have software and we have all the things. It's really the financial literacy piece
Mm.
overall
Mhm.
is kind of lacking in our industry, and not because people aren't talking about it, because I hear people talk about it, what's your profit? What are your numbers? But it's coming from the individual advisors mostly of not
Mhm.
knowing like, well, what should my numbers be? Like, what should I be doing?
Yeah,
How
yeah,
do I track it? And is it going to give me a headache
yeah.
to do it, when I'm supposed to do it? They just don't know what to do. So you can hear it, you can see the reactions on their faces
Right.
when those questions are asked or when that topic comes up.
Yeah.
It's just kind of shied away from, because I find that a lot of people coming into the industry, probably a larger percentage than not, have never run a business.
Right.
Like they've always been an employee. And so we know how that works. You get your paycheck, every so often they take out your taxes and that's it. You keep doing your job, you keep getting paid.
Yeah, yeah.
And, when you own your business, there's way more to it than just having that same paycheck coming like every week, every 2 weeks, whatever it is.
Especially in our industry because there is that like,
Correct.
up and down and seasonality and all of that kind of stuff. And it's so interesting because I heard you say, well, one thing that comes to mind for me, especially like when you're newer in the industry and you're kind of like hearing what other people are saying and what's being thrown out. A lot of times I hear a lot of people focusing on like amount sold. Like how much travel did you sell? Did you sell 1 million? Did you sell 2 million? And it's like, that's maybe a fraction of the story that you need to be aware of, because whether or not you sold 1 million, whether or not you sold 5 million, like how profitable were you? Because at the end of the day, that's what really like is going to make a difference of what you're taking home and what's helping to support your family and how you're covering expenses. And if you're able to hire one day, if that's your goal, all of those things. So that's what I think is kind of like fascinating about this conversation is like, we got to focus on the right numbers. We got to know what we need to focus on. And then we need to know like what we need to pay attention to that's going to actually make a difference at the end of the day. So, for all, like I said, all the things we could talk about today, all the topics we could cover, I'd love to kind of focus in on this idea of profitability, because I think at the end of the day, so many of us are trying to shift and affect that. Like, how profitable are we as business owners? How much money are we making? All of that kind of stuff. But we're kind of missing the plan and the steps that are necessary to achieve what we're hoping to achieve. So let's just start with some basic understanding of like, what is profit? Like, what are we talking about here so that we're all talking about the same thing?
Yeah. So, and it's a very standard definition in the accounting world, even in the tax world, right? Because we want like everybody working on a level playing field when we talk about profit. And in order to have benchmarking and things like that in across industries, we need to all have the same definition and pretty much the same calculation. So profit is it's like at a very fundamental level, it's the money that you have left after you pay your business expenses. Like
Mm-hmm.
what do you have from, and we'll relate it to travel, commissions and fees coming in, and then you pay for all those routine business expenses. And you can, for demonstration, we'll leave salaries out of this. That way you can see like what the true profit is that you're able to potentially pay yourself. But it's very simply the revenue, commissions and fees, less business expenses equals your profit.
Yeah. And do you see there being some sort of like misconceptions around profitability? Like when people are trying to talk about like, oh yeah, this is how my year went, or this is what my goal is. Are there like misconceptions that kind of like get thrown in there? Like, wait a second, I don't think you're talking about profit there. Like you're talking about something else. Do you hear that too?
Yes,
Yeah.
a lot, like
Yeah.
a lot, because, travel is a very sales focused
Right.
industry, right? Like the end of the day, we are sales people, but we are also business owners too. So we're wearing all the hats
Right.
for both roles. And in one scenario or situation, sales may be the relevant thing to talk about because sales maybe raises our commission level with a certain supplier or a tour operator if we hit a certain sales goal. A certain sales goal may be in our financial goals for the year because that can put us at a certain commission amount we'll say for the year.
Mm-hmm.
It gets a little nuanced, at least when I think about it, because we make the sales and there's commission associated with the sales, but you're not collecting the commission when you make the sale.
Right.
So this timing thing throws people off, but it's an indicator of what your revenue will be as long as everybody travels, everything stays the same over time. So it's an indicator, but sales versus revenue per se. And we could have some larger agencies that could potentially be, listening into this, that maybe their revenue is their sales because they're collecting the money directly from the clients and then paying the net for the trips. So
yeah.
Most people, though,
Right.
are just collecting commissions and fees and running all of the bookings through their host agency or, consortia or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So sales is not technically pure revenue.
Yeah.
It's commission and fees are the real revenue coming in. So that's one of the major ones I see. It's just the lingo and the terminology.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
And then probably the other biggest one that goes along with that is so many new advisors think that the commission and fees they receive is their pay.
Yes. 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 Like, yay, it was a good month. Well,
right. But wait a minute, you had to pay all your business expenses.
Yeah.
And you probably have some upcoming expenses when, your commission levels are dropping a little bit.
Right.
That, that money is still earmarked for. So it's not really yours yet.
Yes. Yes. And that's the tricky part, I think, about our industry specifically is like, it came in great. Well, wait, how does it need to go out? Not just for this month, but like the yearly, like overall, like seeing the year as a whole and making a plan for that. So I think you kind of touched on this even at the beginning is like, you can't even do like the month by month profit and loss type of like scenario for our type of industry. It has to kind of be a more of a projected thing that we create and we look at. Can you kind of even just explain that? Because I think that that's probably super foundational for understanding like how to start thinking of it correctly and making a plan.
Yeah. So when it comes to the profit, honestly, I kind of created this framework to demonstrate it in my mind, and I call it outside the bank, right? Okay. And it's really everything that happens with your financial results, with your clients, whatever happens outside of the bank. But we're always focused on looking at our bank, right? Let me look at my app today and how much is sitting there. And wait a minute, how much is due on my business credit card? And is there enough to pay that and pay myself? And right?
Yes,
but
yes.
You had to take all sorts of actions before it got to your bank.
Okay.
So when we're planning, what do you want to come out at the end of the day? Like, what do you want your profit to be? I love reverse engineering things.
Okay.
So if we're looking at projections and even setting financial goals, like what do we want dropping out at the bottom of your money funnel at the end of the year? Like, what's that look like? What's that number? What do you need to be able to pay you that will support your family or add to supporting your family, paying for your personal, maybe investments, retirement, like all of the things? What's that number? And then we work backwards. So
Okay.
what are your business expenses? Because those are fairly consistent, at least when we're talking about like the must-haves.
Mm-hmm.
Insurance, seller of travel license, if you're required to have that, host agency fees, if you pay a monthly fee, like those are pretty set. And then there's all the nice to haves, fam trips.
Yes, yes.
Right? Those, now somebody will probably say, wait a minute, I need to go on those. Yeah, you might, but there's a decision to be made whether you go
Right.
or not.
Right.
So we just kind of project like, what would that look like? And then when you add those two together, your profit and your expenses, now like, here's the revenue I'm looking to bring in for the year so that I can meet that money coming out the bottom of my funnel.
Right. So
And
let's just
see,
play
that's
with let's just give some, just to make sure that everybody's tracking. So say, for instance, you decide what I need to come out of the funnel is like $50,000. And then what I've decided all of my expenses that really need to be like taken care of for the year is $20,000. So now you've decided that what you need your revenue to be is at minimum $70,000 for the year. Right? Okay, cool.
correct.
Just making sure that everybody will track with what we're
Yes.
saying.
And so
Okay.
when we look, and I know we're on a podcast, people are listening, it's a little difficult without visuals. I kind of created a visual for this framework because most of the time in our industry, we're focusing on the marketing funnel. So the marketing to sales, right? And that's kind of where it stops. But whatever drops out of the bottom of that marketing funnel, your commissions, your fees, the money that comes from that goes into the top of your money funnel. So when you work backwards, they're really connected, even though a lot of people don't see it that way. They're like, oh, I'll look at my money. It's tax time. Let's go see what my numbers are for the year. And no, that's your feedback. The money that you see in your bank account is the result of things that have already happened in your business. That's your feedback.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay. Cool, cool, cool. Okay. So the top of the funnel, you have that number because you've worked backwards. What do you do once you're like, oh, okay, that's the number? Like, what do you do with that information?
Yeah, now it crosses over into, the marketing and the selling side, which I don't normally talk about. There's a lot of people in our industry that talk about how to figure out what to sell, how to sell it, where to sell it, how much you need to sell, and quantity of vacations, all those things. But that's where that comes from.
Yeah.
So the revenue piece is really coming from what you're marketing and selling based on your niche, your specialty, what you like to do, all of the things.
Right. Yeah. So here's the thing that I guess probably trips people up. Number one, they're looking at it after the fact. So they're just looking at it when it's all said and done and being like, oh, there's the number, versus kind of like the reverse engineer and looking at it from the beginning of what they need to make. So is that kind of the first step in creating the goal? I don't know. Would you call it a goal or would you call it something else?
Yeah, kind of like a financial plan. Okay. I mean, you can have money goals and then you have other goals. And, when we talk about sales goals, they're really tied to the money goals.
Yeah.
But do those goals make sense for where you want to end up at the end of the year profit wise? Or will you not hit the mark with those sales goals?
Right. So you basically need to create the sales goals based off of what you've decided the money goals need to be, because that'll just tell you what you need to sell. You're going to know, hey, this is a commission that I receive, or your commission split with your host agency, or the fees that you charge, or whatever. All of those things that you have access to, that information, are obviously going to impact what the sales goals need to be in relation to your money goals. Yes?
Correct.
Okay,
yes.
Cool. Just making sure I'm saying that right.
Yes.
Okay, cool. Like I said, I was this is for me as much as it is for everybody else. Okay, so when we are finding that what we've decided, oh, here's what needs to come out of the funnel is not is not coming out the end of the funnel. Do you have any kind of like ideas, suggestions, like ways that you kind of like think through or encourage people in terms of like, well, how do you increase that? How do you maximize it? Like what are the things that we do that affect that are in our control outside of like obviously like, sell more, which is probably one of the things, but like what is it that we do that affects that number?
Yeah. So the biggest one, at least from the money side of the funnel, that you can have more control than what's coming in for the revenue piece is your
Mhm.
expenses. Like, are you running very lean in your agency? And are you spending money in the right area? And the money you're spending, is it contributing to your return on investment for spending
Mm.
that money or your return on time? Right? Because that's why we pay for software and virtual assistants and all those things so that we have time freed up from our schedules to go sell more, work more with our clients, and, all of those things that can help increase the top of the money funnel.
Yes. So what do you find when you like are talking with advisors that like are potential issues or problems when you're looking at their expenses? Like, or do you I mean, I think just from what I know and the advisors I talk to, oftentimes expenses can easily, especially in this industry, get a little out of line, right? It's so easy to go say yes to the fam trip. It's so easy to, oh, well, there's this new software and I need this new software and every new bell and whistle that is going to like make things easier. I probably need that too. But then, of course, that expense category just keeps growing, 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 growing. And that is the part that like we have the most control over, like in the now, is how much we spend on our business. So do you find kind of that like that's the thing that first people need to like reel back in, so to speak, is the expenses in their business?
Yes, that's one of the major ones. I mean, of course, you have to sell, you
Right.
know, a certain amount or you're never going to be profitable, right? There's always that break even point
Right.
to for all of that. So, but when you're looking at expenses, really segmenting them and saying, okay, so what is my must have? Like, what
Mhm.
am I literally required to spend to keep my business open? Like insurance, seller travel, probably, a website. Not that you're really required, but you
To look
have to be
professional.
visible.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like all of those things at a minimum. Now, then we have all the extra softwares like you're talking about, even professional education, professional development type things that we pay to be part of, AMs, conferences, conventions, like all of that. Like some of that may be nice to have
Mhm.
or FOMO, I need to go.
Right. Right, right, right. That's it.
And then
Yeah.
you just start asking yourself really tough questions. So, let's pick a fam trip. Okay, so why do I feel I need this fam trip? Like, what's it going to do for me? Let's start quantifying
Mm.
what that could potentially do.
Mhm.
And do I have a plan to market what I'm learning and what I'm experiencing on this fam trip to more than cover the cost of the trip and not just the financial outlay, but your time outlay as well to
Mm.
make it at least slightly profitable, if not more. So it really needs to align, with the business initiatives, like
Mhm.
where you want to go in your business, not just let's just hop on one because it's offered,
Yeah, yeah. Yay, I'm free. The answer is
right?
yes. It needs to be more than that. So this is a really I don't even know if you would have insight into this or you would want to share, or if there is kind of like a way to kind of understand the averages. So I'm trying to think, is there a way that like, and this might depend kind of like where you're at the end of the funnel, a percentage that we should try and keep our expenses out when we're thinking of like our overall plan and we're like, hey, this is the amount that I've decided that like needs to be coming out of the end of the funnel. I should be trying to keep my expenses at this percentage of that, whether that's 20%, 30%, 50%, I'm not sure. I feel like I just know what my percentage is, but I don't know that I necessarily have said this is why it's this much. It just ends up like I'm looking at it, like you said, after the fact. When it's time to do my taxes, I say, oh, this is how much I spent this year. Yay. I got it. I have it, but so I'm good. But like there was no forethought of like why the percentage was that much of my overall, revenue that went to expenses. So is there a way to kind of think through that or calculate that? That's smart.
It varies so widely.
Okay.
Because what if you have all home-based travel advisor that also has a couple of ICs, right? Mm-hmm. So they're paying commissions to their ICs that maybe another advisor isn't. And that's affecting the percentage of their expenses because they have to pay that out. Or, maybe one is really diving into a specific destination and decided to go do an immersion trip to really learn the ins and outs one year, and it's quite expensive or could be quite expensive, and another one isn't. So, at a minimum, I would say you want your expenses to be, less than half of your revenue. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then the higher your revenue gets, like the lower the percentage of the expenses. Because at some point, your expenses should pretty much max out. And then your revenue keeps going up and up. So
that's true. Yeah. So it's like, okay, they don't need to stay at 40% when you're making.
Right. But I think the key is looking at it over time.
Yeah.
So having the information tracked in a system where you can run reports and say, hey, what does it look like, for 2022? Now let's look at it side by side with 2023 and then 2024. That's when you can really see the growth of what's happening and figure out, like, am I spending too much on this one thing? And I'll just be honest, the travel advisors that I've been working with over the last year, I would say pretty much all of them, when they could see their numbers in, a totaled report, they're like, did I really spend that much on travel? Yes, you did. Like, really?
It is our Achilles heel, isn't it? Yeah, it is our Achilles heel. Right? It is probably what most of us, that line item, where it comes on the spreadsheet, that probably is the easiest to kind of like not pay attention to because we think it's important, but also kind of like let get out of hand because, it's expensive. Like travel is not like, it's not like getting a new little software tool or, paying for a few ads on Facebook. Like travel is definitely an investment and you have to kind of like do the work to understand the ROI that you're going to see on it. And also just kind of like have a plan to actually see ROIs because it's far more than just like I go and now I sell more. Like there's a lot of things that have to go into for us to be able to see ROI on fam trips or travel that we invest in. So that probably is for sure.
So one of the things that I started like suggesting, so you go on a fam trip, right? You can keep track of what it's costing for that specific trip. Mm-hmm. So total that up and then come up with like, well, how many X do you want to make above your cost? Is it 2X? Mm-hmm. Is it 5X? Is it 10X? Come up with that number and track. Like just track over time. Are you getting that ROI you really, would like to from a specific fam trip?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's cool. So I think that also kind of goes into opportunities, like when opportunities arise, what we need to consider as business owners to identify what the potential profitability is or the ROI of that opportunity. So as an accountant, do you like, it's probably hard for like people need to do the travel part of it, probably just what they know about their business, what they know how they're going to market it, what they know about like their client segments and who's potentially even able to go on a trip like that, et cetera, et cetera. Is there other ways to kind of like assess things like this when we're considering like, what's the ROI on this investment that I'm making on the front end, whether that's marketing or hiring a VA or something like that? Is there a way to do our due diligence, I guess, before we invest to kind of say, is this a good investment? Is this a good expense to take on in our business?
Yeah. And there's no like formal way to do it because it's different for every person. But you could ask yourself the question, like, what would I be happy getting out of this expense? So what is the return on either the money I'm spending or on the time I'm saving? Because all of our time has value. So there's value in freeing that up Like, what
Mhm.
would that need to look like to make it be worthwhile? And then even if you want to take a chance on it, there's a lot of new stuff coming out in our industry. Like, we don't know yet. Maybe some, new CRM that's just not new enough to, or hasn't been out long enough for us to make that decision, but we want to try it anyway. So give it a trial period and just keep track of some things. I think if many travel advisors did some time tracking of their own, like, think
Yes,
of yourself like an employee, right? You're working as an employee of your travel business. What are you working on? Like, let's write out everything you're doing. And I can guarantee if people added that all up, they'd be shocked at how much time they're spending on certain things that's not revenue generating.
exactly. Yeah. I'm actually next month going to do a full time study of my every single like hour of my business because I think that there's probably plenty of things that I'm doing that don't have a great return on investment. And also because, when you get to a point where I have a team, I can delegate certain things, but I just do it myself. And is that the best use of my time when I actually have people on payroll that I could have do the same tasks and then it doesn't need to be my exact time, because hopefully my time is more valuable than my VA or, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, doing that time study really shows you kind of like where you're spending what that limited resources and if it could be better spent elsewhere. So that's definitely
Right.
something I need to do.
And so I did this. It's probably been a while back, but figuring out, like, what is your hourly rate, right?
Mm.
It's not like you're paying yourself a $25 an hour salary.
Right, right.
And there's a whole calculation that goes into figuring, like, what should your hourly rate be, because you need to cover your expenses, you need to cover your own pay, like, what would you pay yourself, plus understanding that we don't sell or we don't generate revenue every hour of the day, right? We have some administrative, back office, all of that we still do. That needs to be factored in there, that kind of what we call grossing up. So you come up with a base hourly rate and you gross it up to accommodate for the percentage of your time that may not be revenue generating. And then you have a benchmark to go by, and it could be used for a number of things. Like, well, if I'm going to be able to cover my expenses and pay myself this much, based on me working X hours a week, whatever that is, I need to make this much per hour on every trip I work on. So, like, is the commission and the fee covering my time working on that trip from start to finish? And, if you're paying somebody else to do it, like, are you taking your time and freeing up enough to cover the cost of them and generate the extra revenue?
Yeah, yeah, that's a really important thing for us to be able to know. It also kind of helps like what we say yes to and what we decide to outsource. It's kind of like, oh wow, I spent 2 hours, creating that Travefy itinerary or something like that. But I've decided that my time is worth, $50 an hour, $70 an hour, whatever it is. I can pay somebody, $22 an hour to create the Travefy. That would be a better use of those 2 hours, a better spend, outsourcing those tasks or something like that. But yeah, you have to kind of know what that number is and then make your decisions based off of that to make better quality decisions with your time.
Correct. And it can be anything, what clients are you taking on? Like, is it
Yes.
worth
Yes.
the time, because as you get more experience in the industry, you understand certain types of trips, certain destinations, like the amount of time that we would be involved in building that from start to finish. So, how many hours do you think it's going to take you? And if your hourly rate is, just say, we'll use even numbers, $100 an hour, and it's taking you 5 hours to work on that through, from start talking to the client to booking the components to putting the itinerary, like post travel, all of that, you need to make at least $500 after your host keeps their percentage.
Yes. And so that automatically should have you saying no to things that don't fit those parameters. But you're never going to know what those no's should be unless you have those numbers to kind of like back it up, right? We have a feel, like we kind of already we do have this feeling of like, that was not a good use of my time. You know, those trips that are like, yeah, I think I lost on that one. But it's far more valuable to have numbers associated with it. So you can actually say like, you know, that wonderful trip to, you know, Mexico that is at a lower price point than I feel comfortable selling. Like it should be a no, because this is at the end of the day, I'm losing money on what I've said my time is worth. And then it's a very easy way to kind of like set those parameters and those boundaries and just hold yourself to them to make sure that like you're staying profitable.
Yes. And it's just a benchmark, you know.
Right.
If you don't have a lot of business coming in, you can still say yes. Nobody said
you're the boss.
that,
Yeah.
Right, exactly. Like you don't have to say no just because it doesn't meet that number, but it's a really good benchmark to strive for.
Yeah.
Like
I
that
love it.
or higher.
Or higher. I always like the higher. Okay, I want to kind of make sure that I understand this idea of the projected profit and loss. So, like, say for instance, you're starting the year, and are you basing this projected, like, hey, here's what I'm going to kind of like say it is for this next year, off of just what last year told you? Or is there something else that kind of goes into that decision process?
Yeah, so you start with last year's results, which
Okay.
means you need to have that ready to go.
Right. First and
A lot of
foremost.
people, you know, a lot don't quite yet when it's goal planning time. And typically, like goal planning is December, January ish.
Yeah.
So at least having a really good idea of what last year looked like. And now, like, what do you want to do different? Asking all the questions, like what went well? What would I like to see differently? Am I working too many hours? If I cut back my hours, what needs to happen in order for me to still meet my end of the year profit goal? Some things are going to have to change. So you just ask the hard questions again and make the adjustments. And the biggest piece, really, that plays into this whole projection thing, like we can come up with numbers, you know, I can work numbers backwards and forwards every which way you want. But if the action doesn't happen to make those numbers a reality, then you're never going to meet your projections. So you always have to track each month and reassess every quarter and adjust as needed.
Yeah. So there's a lot of tracking going on with being able to like do this effectively. So first, obviously, you're tracking all of your expenses. Then you're tracking kind of all of these levers, I guess you could say, like different things that you're doing and trying within your business that you feel like is going to move the needle. And you're kind of tracking a month over month or however, like, okay, what did I do? What was the result? How did that impact, you know, the revenue that came in, et cetera, et cetera. So then now you have actual data to be like, oh, great, this is working. This is moving the, you know, revenue in the direction I wanted it to. I'm on track. My projections are happening. Or you find, uh-oh, this is not working. But hopefully you see that before it's December of the next year and you're looking back and say, oh, that didn't really work. You can kind of look at that, I don't know, month by month, quarter by quarter, and be able to kind of like pivot or change or try something new if you're seeing that this is not working. This is not actually
Correct.
in line with my predictions. And so I do have to do something different.
Right. And, you know, the big thing I think that's really difficult for people to grasp is like we sell, and we talked about this a little bit earlier, but the timing of when the commission comes in doesn't align directly with the sale. But as long as you know what those sales numbers need to be to hit that revenue over time, then it's a good indicator. If you're not meeting the sales, then there's something else that needs to change, because without that, the revenue's
It's
not
just
going to
a
come.
hope and a prayer that's just not going to
Right?
happen.
So we don't want to get too, you know, held up like, oh, I made this booking, but I'm not going to get paid till next year. Like that's not going to be in my current year
Yeah.
projections, but that's okay. It's coming because
Yeah.
over time it will level out.
Yeah.
You know, once you get that in the pipeline,
Yeah.
it's just knowing those sales numbers that will help you meet the revenue goal is the key.
Yes, exactly. So knowing your sales numbers that will help you meet the revenue goal, working backwards from the revenue goal, determining what the sales numbers should be, determining what the expenses need to be, that you're subtracting from whatever revenue is coming in that is going to be part of your business expenses for how you run your business and what you need, what you've decided is a must have, adding in those nice to haves as they make sense for your business and as they work for still keeping your profit, at that level that it needs to be. So it's kind of like, hey, I can invest in this because I've met these sales numbers, or maybe I've increased and gone past the sales numbers that I had, planned for. And so therefore I'm going to be making more revenue. And so now I have a little bit more to kind of consider. Do I invest back in the business or into something that I feel like could, help the business run smoother? I have that now available. I'm not taking it out of what I've decided my profit needs to be, because I think that's what happens a lot. It's kind of like, oh, we have the money, but that was like what you're supposed to live off of, not what you were supposed to kind of like, upgrade your itinerary software with or whatever. It's kind of like how you make those decisions.
Yeah, exactly. And it really helps, I think, when you start seeing the numbers routinely. And there's lots of tools available, to be able to do that. I think most people are kind of under the impression, well, I'll just pull it all together one time a year, but that's not helping to really assess like how you're gauging against any kind of goals. And it's the spaghetti on the wall.
Yes, yes. We're trying to get away from throwing the spaghetti at the wall and have real plans, real action, things we can measure, things that make sense, things that are an actual strategy and not, like we said, like a hope and a wish and a prayer, because that's not the best way to be successful business owners, which is what we are. And, it's like the things that hopefully what people are getting from today is like even the things that feel a little bit uncertain or not as natural to us as like, how well do you know Italy? Those are all the things that are going to still make us successful business owners, is what we need to kind of focus on in order to do this well, because it is so much more than just like knowing the travel side of it, being excited by the travel side of it. That's the shiny and that's great. But if we don't have like the business skills that accompany it, we're just not going to see ourselves reaching the levels of success that we want. So that's what I hope that people kind of take away from this and feel more comfortable, like focusing more in this area.
Yeah, exactly. And it's, almost like you wear all the hats.
Yeah, all
right?
of them.
And
Yes.
at some point, we need to wear a CEO hat. And on some days, we need to wear a CFO hat. And on other days, we're the data entry person. It goes from, the entry level or transactional level all the way up to strategy. But this is my opinion. I feel like once you get a grasp on some of these numbers, then that's learning that you can't take away from yourself. Like you're always going to have that knowledge to use going forward and maybe enhance it, or maybe you'll, learn some new ahas over time as you actually see playing out.
Yeah.
But if you don't have the knowledge to begin with, then it's something that can, I won't say like, make your business not successful, because there's plenty of successful people that don't pay attention to their numbers. But I think businesses could be more successful
Yes.
if they did and really embraced, like, let's just learn how to read the numbers.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think even the way we even say success, it really is, I bet, like really comes down to profitability, because you might be successful, you might be selling a lot, you might just have the greatest like network and book of business and what have you. But if you don't even know like how the money's moving and where it's coming from and where it's going out and how you saved for this and put this for retirement and done all these things, it's just like, that's fine. There is a level of success that you have reached, and that's amazing. But like when you think about profitability and how that continues to increase, there's no other way to get there except when you're able to look at the numbers and make decisions and create a strategy based off of that. Otherwise, it's just kind of like going in blind and sticking your head in the sand.
Yeah. And I mean, it's one of those things, I'm sure a lot of people have heard the expression, numbers don't lie, right? And they don't. They paint the picture of your business in a numerical sense, as long as they're accurate and complete. We can't be leaving things out. We can't be like having stuff that we paid on a personal credit card and we forgot to add it in our business numbers and all of those things. So as
Yeah.
long as you capture everything and it's accurate, then they're painting a picture.
Right.
It's just numbers instead of words.
Exactly. Exactly. So thank you for helping us feel more comfortable with painting our pictures with the numbers. I think that like all of us can benefit and find value in doing this well. So I appreciate you kind of just sharing your knowledge and your insight into this. And I know that you do help advisors who maybe like need just a little bit more like one-on-one help or like understanding. And so what is it that you how is it that you help advisors in this area just so they're aware in case they're
Yeah,
interested?
so it's really so far has been pretty individualized because
Okay.
everybody's in a different place and they have different needs. So maybe it's like just hopping on a 1 hour call and let's see where you are.
Mhm.
Or if we have advisors out there that don't have a system to track their money yet, like let's try to get that going first because you need that in order to use the information, the data gathering to make decisions, to create projections, all the things. So there's that we can talk about. And I'm just understanding a little bit more about, okay, I have my numbers. Like, what do I do with them?
Yes, yes, yes. And now what? Yeah. Okay, great.
Exactly.
Wonderful. Well, great. If people want to reach out and kind of just ask more questions or get more information or anything like that, definitely feel free to reach out to Stephanie. She's a wealth of knowledge and also super just insightful with this part of business. And she's added this to the things that she does to kind of give back to the community and the industry and help us all be better because, a rising tide lifts all boats. So thank you so much, Stephanie, for your time today. Thank you for being on the podcast. And we really appreciated having you.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks.